Hello and welcome to a new video from Network Programming in Python. In this video, we are going to discuss FTP, or File Transfer Protocol, and transfer files using TCP socket in Python. This was based on a question from one of our channel's members. How can we transfer files in a network? And this tutorial, hopefully, is going to answer that question. First of all, what is FTP? FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. This is an internet tool provided by TCP/IP. The first feature of FTP is developed by Abhay Bhushan in 1971. It helps to transfer files from one computer to another by providing access to directories or folders on remote computers and allows software, data, text files to be transferred between different kinds of computers. The end user in the connection is known as localhost, and the server which provides data is known as the remote host. Before we get started the tutorial, I would like to tell you why FTP. FTP is a standard communication protocol, but it's not the only one. There are various other protocols like HTTP, and I'm quite sure you're familiar with it. HTTP is used to transfer files between computers as well, but they lack clarity and focus as compared to FTP. Moreover, the systems involved in connection are heterogeneous systems. For example, they differ in operating systems, directory, structures, character sets, etc. The FTP, however, shields the user from these differences and transfer data efficiently and reliably. Okay. Now that you know the usefulness of FTP or File Transfer Protocol, let's go ahead and start our tutorial by creating different files. And I'm going to work in this tutorial with Visual Studio Code. Feel free to use any code editor that you like. Welcome back. Let me go ahead and create my folder where I'm going to create my two files, one for the client, the other for the server. The first file, I'm going to call it tcp-server. And the second file, I'm going to call it tcp-client. I'm going also to create a txt file where I'm going to simulate the transfer of that file from the client to the server. Now let's go ahead and open that folder in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to do so by typing code space dot. And here we have our current directory, ftp-tutorial. First of all, we're going to work with the TCP server file. And before we get started with the code, I would like to tell you what we are going to do basically. First of all, we're going to set up a socket. I hope you know sockets. I have a lot of tutorials on socket programming in Python. If you don't have any idea about that, please go ahead and check my videos first. After setting up a socket, we're going to accept multiple client connections. Then we are going to receive files from the clients. And finally, we're going to save them on the server. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and start by importing the necessary module. It is the only module, in fact, which is the socket module. Next, we are going to check if the script is being run directly. We're going to do that using the if code block. This condition ensures that the code inside the if block is executed only when the script is run directly and not when it's imported as a module. The next thing we want to do is to define the socket parameters. So we will want the IP address of the server, and we're going to store it in a variable called host. Next, we want the port number on which the server will listen to the connections. The next thing we want is the port number on which the server will listen for the connections, and we're going to assign it to a variable called port. In this case, our port is 8080. The next thing that we want to do is to get the number of clients to connect, and for that we're going to prompt the user to enter the number of clients. The next thing we want to do is to get the number of clients to connect. the user here is going to be prompted to enter the number of clients that will connect to the server. Our next step here is to create and bind the socket. And what we want to do here is to create the socket object. And we will do that using socket.socket function. This function here is going to specify the address family. And if you don't know what is the address family, again, please revert to my tutorials on socket programming in Python. But basically what we want to do is to get the socket.af underscore inet. The first parameter is af underscore inet, which refers to the address family IPv4. And what is IPv4? Actually, it stands for Internet Protocol version 4, and this is the dominant protocol of the Internet. And the second parameter is going to be the socket type. And here we are going to choose the sock underscore stream for TCP. And the second parameter we have is the sock underscore stream, which means a connection-oriented TCP protocol. The final step here is to bind the socket to the specified host and port using the bind method. The next step is very obvious. After we have bound the socket to that specified host and port, we want to listen to the total clients connections that the user has entered. As we said, the server socket starts listening for incoming connections from clients. The listen method takes the maximum number of queued connections as an argument. So the total clients is going to be whatever the number that you're going to enter. The next thing that you would want to do is to establish connections with the clients. We're going to start that by creating an empty list. We're going to assign it to a variable called connections. And I'm going to print a statement indicating the initiation of the clients. So what I would like to do now is to create a loop. Let me enter the loop first, and then I will break down each code line. Okay, let me explain everything that we have written here. First of all, the server enters a loop to accept multiple client connections. It calls the accept method on the server socket, which blocks until a client connection is made. Once a connection is established, the method returns a new socket object and the address of the client. The socket object and client address are stored in the connections list for later use. Great, now we are approaching to the end of the server file. I would like to write now the code block to receive the files from clients. So let me create a variable called file no. Initially, this is going to be equal to 0. Also an index, and that's also going to be equal to 0. And then I would like to iterate over each client connection stored in the connections list. Let's go ahead and do that for loop. Now the server is going to receive the file data from each client by calling a method called receive. So I've created here a variable called data, and that's going to take the connection with the sub 0, which means the first connection in the connections list. And as we said, the method is called receive. So the receive data is decoded assuming it is in UTF-8 encoding and stored in the data variable. So in case that if no data, I would like to continue our program. And here I would like to write if not data, then I would like to continue my program. Otherwise, the creation of a new file at the server end is going to take place, and also data writing on that file. Create a variable called file name. That file name is going to be equal to output plus stir and then the file number. We're going to save these data on the output file. It's going to start from 0. So output 0 if we're going to store the first file, output 1 for the second file, and so on. Don't forget to add the extension, which is .txt. Then we are going to increment the file number by 1. Next, I would like to open that output file name. To do that, I'm going to create a variable called foo, and I'm going to use a method called open, and that method simply opens files. So depending on the file name that I have, which typically starts by output. So output 0, output 1, output 2, and so on. And the second argument is going to be W, which stands for writing, because it will be in the write mode. And while data is true, but in case if not data, I'm going to break out of the loop. Otherwise, I am going to write the data to that file name. So I'm going to take the foo variable and I'm going to use the write method, and inside the write method I will have my data argument. So to recap what we have done, we have created a new file on the server with a file name based on the file no variable. The received data is continuously written to this file until there is no more data left. And again, we're going to write the data variable code line, exactly like this one. So I'm going to copy it and paste it here below. Fantastic. Now, the last thing in our server file is to print some statements and close the connection. Last but not least is to close all the connections. So we are going to get out of that loop, and let me say here closing connections, and I will iterate over the connections list for each connection. Then I'm going to close the connection. And with that last line, we are done with our tcp-server.py. So once all the file transfers are completed, the server here is going to close all the client connections. Now let's go ahead and start writing our tcp-client file. And again, we are going to start by importing the socket module. Also, we are going to create our client socket. The exact same first 4 code lines we're going to repeat from the TCP server to the TCP client. So again, similar to the server script, the code checks if the script is being run directly. Then a socket object is created using socket.socket function, specifying the address family socket.af_inet for IPv4. And IPv4 means Internet Protocol version 4. Now we're going to call the connect method on the client socket object to establish a connection with the server. And clearly it takes the server's IP address and the port number as arguments. So we're going to use a while loop here, and we're going to say while true. We want to create file name, which is going to be a variable to which the input of the user is going to be assigned. So input, and we are going to say input file name you want to send or transfer. And we are going to open the file name. In this case, we are going to be in the writing mode. And then we are going to read whatever in that file. We're going to store that in a variable called data. And in case if not data, we are going to break Otherwise, I would like to get inside a while loop. While data, we are going to send the data with the encoding format, with the appropriate encoding format. So what we're going to say here is sock.send, and here we are going to cast or convert the data to string, because data is going to be integer, but we don't need integer, we need a string. That's why I'm going to use a method called string. I'm going to enter the data as the main argument here, and then we are going to encode that. Then again, I'm going to read whatever in that file and store it in the data variable. Then we are going to save and close the file. And in order to avoid any kinds of error, we're going to wrap all that in try except code block. And below here, I'm going to say except input output error. In case of any input output error, we're going to print something like you entered an invalid file name. So this exception is going to be erased only if the user enters an invalid file name or the file cannot be opened. And in such cases, this message is going to appear. And basically, that's the end of the client script. So before we try our program, remember that our file.txt has "this is a simulation for FTP." We're actually going to change in that file later, and I'm going to show you what will happen. I'm going to hit Ctrl+ to open my integrated terminal here. And as we will need more than an integrated terminal, I'm going to take that and put it next to this one. So we will have our server on the left side here, and our client is going to be on this right side here. And eventually we are going to increase the terminal windows representing the different clients or simulating different clients' connections. So let's go ahead and start our server. I'm going to do that by typing python tcp-server.py. Let's say that we want only 2 clients. Now we will have only 2. If you will try to add more than 2 clients, nothing will happen. Initiating clients. Now let's go to our right side window here to start our first client. To do that, we'll say python tcp-client.py. Alright, notice what has happened here. Connected with client 1. We need to input the file name that we want to send or transfer. So notice here the connection with the client 1 has been established. This is a basic socket connection. Let's go ahead and connect the second client. To do that, we're going to add one more PowerShell terminal window. And we're going to run python tcp-client.py. When we will hit enter, let's get back to our server. Now we are connected with client 2. Now what will happen if I will try to add a third client? Let's try that. Let's get back to our server and nothing happens. Why? Because the maximum number of clients is predetermined by the user here, which is 2. If you will enter number 3, in that case you will get connected with client 3. Whatever the number of the clients that you're going to determine, the connections is going to follow suit. Let's go ahead and delete that one because we don't need it. So we have this client 2, we have this client 1, and we have our server. Now remember that our file here is file.txt. That's the file that we would like to transfer. So let's go ahead and write file.txt. And notice here what has happened. Output0.txt file has been created. Notice that nothing yet is written or saved because we haven't closed the connection yet. So for now, let's close that file. And let's go to our second client. And let me actually add a new line. Let's say this is a second line. I'm going to save, and I'm going to say this file I want to transfer, file.txt. And let's get back also here to our first client, and let's also say file.txt. All right, so let's break out of that connection and notice what has happened here. Receiving file from client 1. Received successfully. New file name is output0.txt. Now let's go ahead to the second client and also close that connection. Received successfully. New file name is output1.txt because it was received from client 2. So the file transfer was successfully done from client 1 and client 2. We have two different files. We have output0.txt and output1.txt. If we'll check output0.txt, we'll find that this is what's inside. Output1, we'll find that this is what's inside the file. And I specifically did that in order to show you the difference between both files, output0 and output1. And we have successfully simulated the connection of different clients with the main server. So I hope you liked the video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.